Yes?
I had a question about the anthology.
Yes.
I probably got the answer as soon as I walked in the lobby, but I thought I'd ask you. It seems very much a turning back to poetry's heritage and poetry's history.
We can't quite hear you. Sorry.
The anthology seems very much a turning back to poetry's heritage and poetry's history, and I think that's great, but as a contemporary poet, I'm also interested in poetry's future. And I was just wondering how much of the anthology are poems by living poets?
None. That was one of the, in the introduction I phrased it, the only two things the poets have in common. They all wrote in English, and their work has survived them. My way of saying they're all dead.
Look, you know, the river, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The River Merchant's Wife is timeless. Poetry doesn't have a, excuse me, I'm going to start ranting. Poetry doesn't really have a past, present, and future. I don't mean to contradict you, but I think that, you know, you read the river, or at least it seems to me when you read The River Merchant's Wife, you hear a voice which is from whatever early, you know, it's from maybe the 6th century. It's talking, like Sappho speaking to us in a voice which is completely contemporary, if you want to be a presentist and biased. There is no time in poetry as far as I'm concerned. I think that's what makes it great. And so these poems, yes, they are sort of very familiar poems. They are poems from the past in Americana, but they're also, one hopes, timeless. I believe they are.
But in conceiving the book, we sort of had to figure out some simple way of defining the book, and that is poems that have survived the poet. That's. I mean, I'm a big fan of the written word by living poets. God knows.
Well, Billy Collins says in the back of your book, his blurb says these were the poems that scared us away from poetry, and
Yes.
you know, when they're taught badly, that's true. But I think they're actually the poems that remind us why we love poetry.
I found it so fascinating, presented with the challenge. You know, what poems have I liked in my life? To go back and realize how many poems have touched me at different ages and for different reasons, and how much more I knew about poetry than I thought I did. I don't really consider myself deeply read in poetry by any means. But, you know, it was sort of surprising, and I thought that was the other idea of the book, is to sort of remind everybody of that. You know more poems than you think you do.
Yeah.
Yes? One last question? Better make it a good one.
I'll try. I was curious when you mentioned both about your grandmother reciting the poem and your mother in the grocery store, you know, reciting the different things, and sort of the looking back on that kind of time when elocution was taught and people memorized poems. I think, I mean, in modern education, a lot of times that's seen as sort of an archaic form of learning, and I'm wondering how you both feel about potentially starting to teach that way again, whether it's young children or high school or college, but bringing back recitation and memorization of poems and other speeches into education.
Well, I teach poetry, and I ask my students I don't know that I bring back elocution necessarily, but it's a tempting idea to torture my students. But I do ask them to memorize poems, and sometimes I get a little resistance, you might say, to memorizing poems. But then when students get into it, they really get into it. I also say to them, how many of you know the lyrics to Gilligan's Island, let's say? And people can sing, there was on and on, or the Brady Bunch, you know, and say, well, you memorized all this, right? And also, you know, lots of songs. And also people, as John was saying, do know poems. They always know Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss. I'm talking about people who just, you know, don't want to memorize. And then they'll say, oh, I might know a Robert Frost poem, Fire and Ice or something. Anyway, my point is, once they start memorizing, they discover they really do love it. Because when you have a poem memorized, it's your poem in a way. I hate to put it in ownership terms, but it does beat with your heart and flow with your blood.
Yeah, our high school
What did you learn?
World is too much with us.
Oh, the world's too much with us. Oh, God. That's the one. Yeah, the world, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Yes, yes.
But this volume, for me, it's just the most recent of my kind of, it's a sort of quixotic campaign of mine of the last 10 years of try to. I feel like a Luddite, or put another way, an old fart. It's like, why can't they learn the way I learned? Why I used to read, I used to memorize. You know, we are we are in such a techno-saturated age, and I just think anything we can do to sort of reinvigorate the love of language and literacy, and just taking your time, expanding your attention span, taking a little leisure in the acquisition of knowledge. And I do feel, I played Don Quixote about 8 years ago, and by God, I identified very strongly with the man.
Yeah.
I'm a fool, but a quixotic fool. I do have high ideals.
You do have-
I think that's about it, isn't it?
It's a good place to end. I do have high ideals.
Thank you so much for coming.